I find sort of the premise of this anti-American is the very underpinning of your legislation, anti-American.
What you are describing is the alienation of the church from the state, not the separation of church from state. And that is what is un-American. It is un-American to discriminate against people because of their religious beliefs.
I'm not going to say thank you for this because all you've done is just something.
Representative Click, you must have been reading my brain. We have a spiritual connection. Common sense. That's basically common sense. So so would you agree with me?
Representative Thomas, I would agree with you that we have common sense.
Okay, that's a good answer.
There were a lot of words that were just said.
And maybe I can get some clarification from you. When we're talking about Sage, who was taken from her parents tried to reach out to her, her parents tried to send her correspondence, her parents tried to see her, and the authorities told her that her parents didn't want her. Is that parental alienation? Would you consider that parental alienation?
Just so I'm perfectly clear.
Just for the record, you did not answer if that was parental alienation, what happened to Sage.
So I will be very, I don't know what the term means, parental alienation.
I know Representative Click, Gary Click, one of really the best in the country, of course in the state of Ohio, but across the nation. And yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to have Representative Click and Klopfenstein for sponsored testimony.
But there's no more local control than Bob and Betty Buckeye.
Well, that explains why he keeps saying, well, that's not the way Representative Click does it.
I'm not supposed to get emotional, but I am.
Then we sat down with Click to discuss his bill and the controversy surrounding it.
And the chair would like to invite Representative Click to present testimony.
The question is, shall the bill pass? The chair recognizes Representative Click.
Welcome back to What's Clicking with State Representative Gary Click. I'm Janae Myers, his legislative aide. Representative, I believe you set a record this week for the amount of sponsored testimony within a course of an hour and 10. I believe we had 4 sponsored testimonies,
Yes.
1 on Tuesday, 4 on Wednesday, and then we also had proponent testimony for HB 200, the America First Act, and HB 393. You want to summarize?
I was moving too fast.
I should have put you on roller skates to get you to all the committees we had. My gosh.
Yeah, that might have been dangerous with all those stairs. I don't know if it would have worked out, but
we could have gotten a ramp. We could have had a sports day in the State House.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not Tony Hawk. That's for sure. But it was crazy, and I felt like I'd get from one committee to the next, and I was like, okay, let me catch my breath. All right, and you have to in your mind, I've been working on all these subjects for a while, but then in your mind you got to shift gears. For am I talking about tax policy? Am I talking about healthcare? Am I talking about parental rights? Am I talking about education? Because we hit all of those all those benchmarks this week and testimony and more. So what we've done for the episode today, Janae, is rather than interview someone, I just want to give our viewers and our listeners a chance to just step into committee. But I don't know what the total number of hours was, but it was really literally hours worth of committee. So I'm not going to show everybody everything, but we'll just kind of give you a glimpse of what it was like to give 1 on Tuesday evening and then 4 on Wednesday morning, and 3 of them were scheduled at the 9 o'clock hour and 1 of them at 10 o'clock hours. So, but it was really about less than an hour that I gave, I think, 4 testimonies. And listen, the topics that we hit on are very important. So the first one was that we were in the Senate. It was the Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act, which was really about academic freedom for educators. They should be free to talk about history in full, but many teachers are self-censoring because they fear that they're going to be discriminated against if they talk about the history of America in context of religion. And how did religion play a role in the founding of America? And it played a huge role. In fact, I'm always learning more about that. One of the things I learned that I talked about in testimony is that phrase from Abe Lincoln, of the people, by the people, and for the people. He actually borrowed that from John Wycliffe, who was a reformer, actually one of the first people to translate the Bible into English, and it was in the preface of one of his Bibles, and so many things. But can you teach that without being accused of proselytization? They're afraid not. But the Democrats, who always talk about academic freedom, they don't want academic freedom here. They just want it to push their agenda, but not to talk about actual factual history. And so we did that. In the Senate, we also had My Child, My Chart, which basically parents were being cut off from their children's My Charts and not having access to that. And we can't make the whole thing the way we would like to make it, just because it involves HIPAA and federal regulations. But we have, as I say in testimony, parents have a right to know what they don't have a right to know. So if they don't have a right to know, but they don't even know they don't have a right to know it, they find out at the last minute in critical situations. So all we're really doing is saying, get the parents informed, and you can learn more, because we're going to show you that part of the testimony. You can never predict how people are going to vote, but it was bipartisan in the House, and the Democrats on the committee seem to be actually split. I don't know how they will vote, but Representative Liston, she seemed like she might be in favor of it. I'm not certain, but she used to be a representative. They both used to be representatives, and so I revert to that, but they're both senators now. Senator Ingram, she hates it, but she hates everything that comes from Republicans, so that's not a surprise. So we had those in the Senate. In the House, we were talking about racetracks and the right to race, and some common sense legislation that it seemed like we're getting support from both sides of the aisle, that you can't move in next to a racetrack and then all at once sue the racetrack for doing what a racetrack does. You have to do due diligence before you move into a neighborhood. You can't just move in and complain about the people that have been there years and years before you. And so, but we've seen some frivolous lawsuits, for people who move in and want to sue. We talked about that. And then Rep. Stevens talked about Talladega Nights or Talladega. I've not seen the movie. He's telling me I got to go see the movie, so maybe I will watch the movie. But we had a great race reference in there. And then we talked about HB 613, which is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, because folks are not getting their tax issues resolved in a timely manner. And so Representative Thomas and I have a bill that is highly supported by the Ohio Chamber of Commerce to deal with that. And then we saved for last. It wasn't the last testimony we gave, it was the second to the last, but it was probably the most complicated, the most fierce testimony that we had all day. And it shouldn't be, but it's about parental rights, and it's called Affirming Families First, House Bill 693. And there are places, especially in Cuyahoga County, which we called out, that have been creating a database. They've been proactively screening kids as young as 5, saying, do you like boys? Do you like girls? Do you feel like a boy? Do you feel like a girl? And listing parents on whether they're affirming or not affirming. And that is outrageous. And so we are making sure that we declare in the law that it is not harmful or abusive to affirm a child's natural sex. In other words, it's okay to call Johnny Johnny and Susie Susie. You don't have to call Johnny Susie or Susie Johnny. But some places want you to do that, and we're saying no. And that got contentious because the Democrats, they're not really all for the parental rights. They want to tell you how to raise your children, and it was kind of a fiery debate there in the Q&A. So that's probably the longest section. Each of the other ones is shorter, and then we got to that one. So we're just going to give you a preview today of a day in the life of Representative Gary Click.
All right. Well, I'm excited. Let's get on into it.
Up next is first hearing on House Bill 486. Representative Click, welcome to committee.
The Charlie Kirk American Heritage Act is all about academic freedom. What do I mean by that? Many times there are teachers or superintendents or educators who are afraid to go into full detail about certain aspects of American history, such as our Christian heritage. And the reason they are afraid of that is because there are hate groups out there simply affirming the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And he later wrote a pamphlet that was called The Bloody Tenet of Persecution. And in that pamphlet, he drew from Isaiah chapter 5, believe it or not, And from that passage, he concluded this idea, this concept of a wall of separation to protect the church from the state. But in 1947, in Everson v. Board of Education, there was actually a Klansman that made it to the Supreme Court. We believe that teachers have the right to teach true history. What history is, we don't want to untether our future from our past.
And we just want to make sure that our teachers understand that it is real. They don't have to be intimidated. They don't have to be bullied.
And I've named this after Charlie Kirk because I think it's that ignorance about our American history that sometimes generates that hate and that frustration.
So I find sort of the premise of this anti-American is the very underpinning of your legislation, anti-American.
What you are describing is the alienation of the church from the state, not the separation of church from state. And that is what is un-American. It is un-American to discriminate against people because of their religious beliefs.
I'm not going to say thank you for this because all you've done is just something. I'm not real sure.
So there is a mixed message that is going to our educators. There is no one there to protect them other than outside institutions when they get sued.
Will they include that the Baptists bore the, hot coals to the tongues of people that didn't agree with them?
My faith ancestors were persecuted as Baptists because they were not a part of the established church. And that's why a group of 500 of them met in Virginia, and they took Daniel Boone's Wilderness Trail and fled to Kentucky in order to experience religious freedom. Some of them were imprisoned.
But this bill doesn't say that.
Yes, it does.
This bill talks. So what you've done is say, we're going to talk about how Christianity brought us through. And when we wrote the Declaration of Independence, everybody that signed it was actually thinking, thank God, and they were not. So I resent the fact that you brought this, and therefore you're going to call it the Charlie Kirk Act, who had some very non-Christian beliefs as far as I'm concerned. But that.
We don't have to give permission for people to teach the negative aspects of Christianity. They're already doing it. I'm sorry, that may frustrate you, but from where I sit, I see that happening. Why can we not teach the fact that that was a part of our American history? Why can we not teach that the reason we have our Constitution today is because of a pastor by the name of John Leland? Madison promised him a Bill of Rights. And so Leland endorsed him. Madison won. He sat on the committee, the ratifying committee, and saw the Constitution through. And then the first Speaker of the House, ma'am, was a pastor, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. And Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg is the top signature on the Bill of Rights. And that First Amendment in the Bill of Rights says, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Why is that anathema to teach that part of our history?
And that was very self-serving for that particular
Ranking member,
religion.
I have not. All right. Well, with that will conclude the first hearing on House Bill 486.
And now I'll call forward House Bill 693 for its first hearing. I'd like to call Representatives Dieters and Click to provide sponsor testimony.
And protect local jobs, tourism, and decades of racing heritage for future generations. I will yield to my joint sponsor, Representative Click, to provide his testimony.
The premise behind this legislation is that no one should be able to move in next to a racetrack and sue a racetrack for doing what racetracks do. He purchased, he is an attorney. He might wear a black robe or he might not between Monday and Friday these days. But back in the day, he had a racetrack and he was near the local airport that is actually owned by former State Representative Rex Stamschroeder. And someone purchased a house in between the racetrack and the airport and filed suit. And I think he told some of his friends, he said, if you take this case, you're dumber than he is for moving in between a racetrack and an airport and not expecting noise. There are over 40 or approximately 40 racetracks in Ohio, and they support nearly 20,000 jobs, 1.4 billion in wages and benefits, 4.94 billion in economic impact on the Buckeye State. This doesn't happen without kicking up a little bit of dust, revving a few engines, and one or two rowdy fans hanging out under the bright lights at night. We certainly respect the rights of homeowners. Please don't misunderstand that. But we also believe in responsible home ownership. And if you're going to purchase a home, it's incumbent upon you to know what's in that community. This is bipartisan legislation that has passed both in Iowa and North Carolina, as my joint sponsor has told you, and we hope that it'll find the same success here for the Buckeye State, beginning here in the local government committee.
It's more about the grandfather clause, but I can't have this bill be here and not make a Ricky Bobby reference. So this is kind of my, if you're not first, you're last question. Does this only apply to racetracks who exist today? So somebody can't come in and build a new racetrack and fall under this bill?
And the second part of my question is, would this apply to county fairs and fairgrounds? Because if you ever been to a tractor pull, it's just as loud as a racetrack. So really, two questions.
Through the chair to Representative Stevens, thank you for those questions. It would only apply to racetracks that are currently in operations today. Any new racetracks would have to be, zone permitted, and going forward would have to comply with those rules and regulations. And I will have to get clarification. I do not believe, that it would apply to fairs. So there's a possibility of that, but we can get clarification on that. That's actually a really good question.
Follow up? Okay. Representative Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to applaud you for bringing this bill to our attention. It is long overdue. I want to give you a little story. Moeller Speedway, it's in Brown County. It's in an area that doesn't even have zoning. It's been there forever. It's a dirt track. But the neighborhood grew into the facility, went to the judge and asked the judge to put a court order in, not allowing them to emit dirt into the air, have loud noises, etc. So I applaud you for this, because the Kim Moellers of the world live on the margins sometimes because of the ebb and flow of people going to the racetrack, and they shouldn't have the worry that they might be put out of business because somebody doesn't like the fact that they're there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a long time, and they had the jet cars, and they were really, really loud. And
The racetrack would still have to comply with any local permitting. So any expansion would have to be permitted and scrutinized in that way. So they would still have to be compliant.
Gotcha. Okay. Follow up?
Proceed.
Thanks. Thank you. Are there any other industries that we have on the laws on the books like this? Like
that information? Are you aware of any?
I do believe that in agricultural situations for farms and so on, I believe that they are protected when neighbors move in and, oh, we didn't realize we're going to have this smell. Is if they're trying to build a new racetrack or do something new that they haven't done, they still have to comply with all local ordinances. There are time frames and what time you can race and what time you can't, and all of those things.
Representative Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for the testimony. Representative Click, you must have been reading my brain. We have a spiritual connection. Common sense. That's basically common sense. So, so would you agree with me that the owners or whoever purchased property in that area probably should have done some research, or the realtor who sold them the property should have advised them that you're moving next to a racetrack.
Representative Thomas, I would agree with you that we have common sense.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And this concludes the first hearing of House Bill 639.
Next up, the first hearing for House Bill 162, Representative Click enacting the My Child, My Chart Act.
Good morning, Chair Huffman, Vice Chair Johnson, Ranking Member Liston, members of the Senate Health Committee. Thank you for your patience. This is my third testimony this hour, and if I'm out of breath, that's why. Over the last year or so, I was informed by many parents from both sides of the aisle in different situations that all at once they were being noticed that they did not have access to their child's online charts. And I had moms throwing their hands on their hips saying, "What do you mean my 12-year-old has to sign for me to have access to their medical records?" Who said she was turned over to a collection agency because of the fact that her child's My Chart, she didn't have access to it. She didn't know she didn't have access to it. And so she didn't see the bill. And so they were turning over, and this collection agency calls her. She says, "What are you talking about? I always pay all of my bills." And they found this out. Her daughter was scheduled for surgery, and she had to pre-register for the surgery the next day due to a sports injury. And she went on to pre-register, and all at once she didn't have access and was just suddenly cut off. She had no access. She had to go pull her child. And this is not any type of a nefarious behavior by the medical profession, at least not in my opinion. If the parent does not have to consent for this act, then the parent does not have legal rights to see that information. But here's the 8 things that a child can do without their parents' consent. Some of them may be controversial, some of them may not be. But donating blood, emergency medical care for sexual abuse victims, testing for HIV, venereal disease diagnosis and treatment, drug and alcohol abuse diagnosis and treatment, medical care for minors prosecuted as adults who are confined to state correctional facilities, and certain outpatient mental health services for minors between the ages of 14 and 17, obtain an abortion without parental notification through a judicial process. And so because parents don't have the rights to those 8 things, perhaps they just cut off the whole chart. You can't see anything because they can't separate it. And so this bill takes a practical approach to this. There has been bipartisan support in the House Committee and on the floor. And what we just simply say is every year, primary care physician for that child, the pediatrician, once a year will certify to the parents and say, these are the things that your child is allowed to do without your consent. And because you don't have to consent to that, you will not have a right when they get to the age where these things might be happening. You may lose access to your child's online My Chart, but the child can sign off and give you access. So basically what we're saying is parents have a right to know what they don't have a right to know. In other words, give me the information, because so many parents are caught off guard because they just don't understand the process. No one's informed them of this process. So what we're doing is just making sure that parents are informed and have an opportunity if they and their children decide to amend that situation. Like I said, we've received many stakeholders. It passed Health Committee 10-2 and it passed the House 87-6. And I will take a break here and catch my breath and be happy to take any of your questions.
So I really love the transparency components of this. I know about I have kids who are not quite teenagers anymore, although one's still 19, and I still find it hard that I can't order his prescription contacts because I'm no longer his guardian.
Once a mom, always a mom.
Yeah, well, now he's 19 though, so I understand it, but I certainly feel the challenges that parents face in that adolescent period where kids are becoming more independent and they have to give you permission for the chart, and that's not always expected. So I think that that's a good thing. I wanted to touch base about.
And this bill now belongs to the committee. So if the committee would choose to do that, I would not stand in the way of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And even some of these that are listed, HIV testing or any, do you have any data as to who has been impacted other than your secretary and how many other people you talk to in the grocery store? Because my theory is that we're getting down to the abortion piece and not some of this other stuff. So where's the data?
And you are right. Some of us have different views on some of those things and whether those things should happen or shouldn't happen. So I appreciate the fact that you identify that. I've tried to be very careful and cautious in drafting this legislation to only address the issue that we're talking about today. Certainly we could have debates on some of those things that are in that list. I have avoided that debate because I just want to deal with this issue of making sure that parents are informed and there's transparency. And my goal, and if we're going to have those debates, let's have those debates somewhere else in another piece of legislation, but that is not a part of what I am trying to attempt to do here today.
Oh,
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. And I get it, but it's still an issue. And my concern is, of course, it says my child, my chart. That it's actually the parent's chart along with the child.
But what we're doing is we're taking that surprise element out that you're not finding out when you get called by the collection agency, or you're not finding out when you go to try to register your child for surgery the next day. That's not when you find out you don't have access. So we're skipping the surprise because they'll find out sooner or later. They're going to find out if it's a good parent who's trying to follow up on their children. We're just trying to be proactive in it. And Senator Liston can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I understand it in my research, the parents do have access to the hard copies of the record. So you could go into the physician's office and say, I want the hard copies, and they would just give you what you're allowed to have. They won't give you what you're not allowed to have. But the technology doesn't permit that, because that's what I was trying to get to originally, is to say, okay, let's separate this in the technology. This is what you're allowed to have. This is what you're not allowed to have. And they said, we can't, which I still don't understand it, because it seems like they should be able to do it to me. They said they can't.
An 8-year-old, and this, according to this bill, an 8-year-old says, okay, you can have my chart. There's no way for them to revoke that, even though it says they can revoke it, but it isn't included in the bill. So I don't buy that the My Chart is a way for them to find out, oh God, I'm getting sued. They have that anyway. I don't care what anybody says.
I'm not sure if there was a question.
There was no question. I'm sorry.
maybe I'll ask a question. So heard the 5-year-old and the parent gets the chart. Can the 5-year-old becomes 13 and the problems of the 13 or 15-year-old change? Can that, at that time, can the 13 and 15-year-old block these things from going to the parent? Or once you sign off when you're 5 years old, the parent gets the chart?
Thank you for that question, Chair. And I don't know that is spelled out in the language. My presumption, and it is a presumption, would be that the child could revoke that at any time. My personal view is that if I'm paying the bills and if you're living in my home, I should have access to your records.
Okay.
But that's not exactly what this does.
Yeah.
But that is my personal view.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much. That will end the first hearing today on House Bill 162.
We are now going to move forth to House Bill 613, our own illustrious members, Click and Thomas, for first hearing. House Bill 613, while they're getting up there, is to modify tax enforcement authority, and we are hearing sponsor testimony.
Mr. Chair, I thought we were next until you said illustrious, and then I wondered who else might be going next.
Well, I consider every member of this committee illustrious.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm sorry. This is my fourth testimony in the last hour, so I may be slightly out of breath. Chair Romer, Vice Chair Thomas, Ranking Member Troy, and the illustrious colleagues on the Ohio House Ways and Means Committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 613, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Among those prized principles of American liberty include the right to redress our government in due process and a timely education of the alleged violations. We have the right to tell the government that they got it wrong. Unfortunately, many of our taxpayers are experiencing something less. They're complaining that tax appeals are long and drawn out and untimely. In the meantime, the taxpayer is being assessed fines and interest on unresolved and disputed tax obligations. If Ohio is going to be the place to do business, we have to be the state where business can do their business without unnecessary impediments, red tape, and bureaucracy. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights will achieve the following. It'll require the tax commissioner to appoint at least one problem resolution officer, and that contact information must be listed on the homepage. Interest must stop accruing after 1 year if the determination is not made. Tax commissioners shall provide a detailed report on the number of audits, appeals, and resolutions, including the amount of time required to resolve those cases. It must also tell us if they are private, personal, or if they are business disputes. Right now, folks have a hard time finding that information. The tax commissioner shall grant a hearing on appeals within 180 days. Representative Thomas and I have spoken with the tax commissioner and the Board of Tax Appeals, and we understand the unique challenges that they face. We're not trying to throw arrows or darts or rocks at them. We know that they want to do these things. They have a desire to do these things, and they have some challenges in accomplishing these goals. And they may come in, we anticipate that they will come in and make some recommendations on how we can help them to help the taxpayers, which is ultimately our goal. And we want to work together. So we're open to collaboration with them and with this committee and the obligations. I now yield to the illustrious Dave Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member, fellow committee members. Really appreciate the opportunity to join this bill with Representative Click. With his testimony changes today, we kind of condensed all into one testimony in case one of us had to give it. I will only add to Rep. Click's testimony that this is a bill not just for businesses and those that are appealing from the commercial side, but really I view this almost much more for the individual side. As auditor through the board of revision process, we had many traditional average Bob and Betty Buckeyes that would appeal their property value to the Board of Tax Appeals. In that process, while at the county level, I would bake cookies and we had a really nice, easy process for the Board of Revision, their experience at the state level was not as positive. So just to reiterate, establishing timelines, shot clocks for appeals, requiring annual reports and audits of those, and expediting the refunds and the interest side means the taxpayers will have a much better sense of timing. As Rep. Click started, we should never put barriers up to our citizens and our taxpayers challenging their government.
I have people that reach out to me periodically about issues that are taking a long time for resolution. Did you hear actual constituents, taxpayers that reached out to you and said that this is not a bill in search of a problem, but it really is a problem right now?
Through the chair, to the chair, yes, I have been in some meetings with taxpayers, also with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. This is very important legislation to the chamber, and they have connected me with taxpayers who are having difficulties getting resolution to their taxes.
Okay.
Chair, I will also add that in our conversation with the Department of Taxation, The department, a vast majority of the time, is far faster than what our shot clock in this bill is actually dictating. So we believe they will be fully compliant with the vast majority. It's those much more intricate cases that are also much more costly to our taxpayers that we're trying to have them have resolution much faster. I too have experienced complaints from taxpayers at the county side.
Thank you. Ranking Member Troy. Mr. Chairman, thank you, gentlemen.
Obviously, you want the Board of Tax Appeals to move a lot quicker on tax appeals. And for the last several years, they have approached the General Assembly saying that they are horribly understaffed, and we haven't done anything. I mean, so basically you're saying we want you to have that engine run a lot faster. We're not going to give you any gas to run that engine. So I think that, you know, we need to recognize that they have been there. They had their budget hearing, I think, in front of this committee, the Board of Tax Appeals, talked about their staffing shortages. And so if you want them to move faster on this, I mean, I can't support this bill unless there's appropriation to help them get this job done. And I just think we need an appropriation. They don't have the staff to do what you'd like them to do in this particular bill.
Through the chair to Representative Troy, thank you for those comments. And I did address that in my sponsor testimony, that we had those conversations with them. We are aware of those issues, and we expect them to come in. And Representative Thomas and I talked about, you know, are we willing to work with them? And we said yes. You know, we are willing to collaborate, as I said in my testimony, with this committee and with them to make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to achieve the job that they're seeking to do.
I explicitly asked the BTA and the Department of Taxation, can we give you more resources for your tax appeal process? They did not request and said they could not request. So that was one of the hangups with that process.
Number two, there are actually myself, for example, one of those.
So we are also looking at policy changes as well, in addition to negotiations with them, as Rep. Click said.
You used to have 1,400 employees. Now you're down to 850. How cumbersome is it to make sure we have proper tax compliance in the state of Ohio? And
Representative Glasper, what were you thinking?
Sorry to everyone. This is probably too complicated of a question for an initial testimony, but maybe you have some commentary. I thought that some of the tax reforms that have happened over the last several years eliminated a lot of the school districts coming in as outside parties challenging these cases, and so that the volume of the cases went down. And so the acuity, if you will, the complexity of these cases that remain are the ones that are actually hard. Is there something different the state needs to be doing to enable tax to, again, meet the timeline that you're doing beyond money, that because these are the more complicated cases that still remain there? If you have any commentary on that.
Through the chair, Representative Glassburn, and a complimentary shout out to Bob and Betty Buckeye for my colleague, Representative Rogers over here. They spoke to us about the need to have qualified tax attorneys because it takes time to bring them up to speed. So it's not like they can just hire them tomorrow and they're ready to roll. There's a training process, there's a qualification process. There's the amount of earnings that they get because, quite honestly, they can go somewhere else, use the resource, and make far more money doing less complicated work. And so, I think those are things that they should bring into this committee, and they should elaborate on those things from their perspective rather than allowing me to represent them in that. I think I certainly, for one, am willing to hear what they would like to ask for more directly to the committee rather than just the IP meetings that we've had with them. Let them present their case to this whole committee, and then let this whole committee decide what we need to do, because that's where I said we're not throwing stones at them. We understand the difficulty they have, and we also understand the desire that they have to provide good service. We do think there are some roadblocks in the way that are inhibiting them from achieving what they want to achieve. And so we need, as a committee, to examine those needs and decide together and collectively what is the best way to help them achieve those purposes. But behind all of it, we have to look out for that taxpayer.
Whether it's an individual or it's a business, we need to make sure that their needs are met. And if that requires an appropriation, then this is the appropriation. If it doesn't, it's not. That's not something I'm prepared to decide single-handedly myself today. But I think that as a community, we can take a look at all of that. Chairman,
This also isn't just a property tax bill. This also deals with sales tax and income tax as well. So putting all of that kind of together and looking at those timeframes is also important.
And Representative, you are correct that the cases, the easier cases are not necessarily coming before the BTA. The cases that they're getting are very difficult. Other questions, comments? Seeing none, that'll constitute the first hearing on House Bill 613. And with no further business to come before the committee, for the fourth time in under an hour, we are adjourned.
Welcome to committee. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Please excuse me if I'm out of breath. I just finished giving testimony elsewhere, and it's a busy day. But thank you, Chair Thomas, Vice Chair Swearingen, Ranking Member Sonnenberg, and distinguished members of the Ohio House Judiciary Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present sponsored testimony on House Bill 693, the Affirming Families First Act. The heart of this bill is found in section 2151.023, which states, in no event shall recognizing or affirming a minor child's sex be considered any of the following: abuse, neglect, or risk thereof, as contrary to the best interest of the child, as creating an unsafe environment for the child. And it states in 3129.14 that it is the public policy of the state that a parent has the fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's minor child, including the right to affirm the minor child's sex. In other words, it is not unlawful to raise your son as a boy or your daughter as a girl. Why is this necessary? Really, this is common sense. So why is this necessary? Well, let's start with Sage's story. If you watch the State of the Union address, you saw a young girl named Sage who was there. And Sage was a little confused as a young person, started maybe trying to identify as a boy. Her parents actually lost custody of her, and she was placed in a boys' home where she was molested, where she was sexually abused, and where she ultimately ran away from. And she actually, they put her online, put her in contact with all the trans sites and so forth. And she was talking to what she thought was a 16-year-old boy somewhere else. She ran away to that 16-year-old boy, except it was an adult male predator. And she became a victim of human trafficking. And her mother had to search far and near, high and low, just to find Sage. And she was, by the way, told by the people who took her in Child Protective Services that her mother didn't want her because she identified as a boy, which is a lie. And they were withholding all the letters and everything and every attempt that the mother tried to make to see Sage. And so Sage returned home. Fortunately, she's now doing well. She's doing better. And she was acknowledged at the State of the Union address. In Maryland, there's an African-American Christian family, veterans, who served our country faithfully. They have an autistic young son who was struggling with his gender identity. And CPS came and took that son away from the parents because they would not call their son their daughter. And Colorado recently has passed an outrageous bill. It's House Bill 25-1312. And basically, parents are required to accept and to validate the declaration of their child when they declare that they are the opposite sex. And if they don't, parents are labeled as coercive and dangerous by the courts. How does this relate to Ohio? Well, there's coercion in Cuyahoga County. The Department of Youth and Children's Services was caught red-handed, laying the foundation for just such efforts. And they were doing things like this. They were proactively screening children for their SOGI, for their sexual identity and gender orientation. They actually have a script and guidelines they were publishing on their website, how to talk to a child about their sex, their gender identity, and not just 18-year-olds. They have 5-year-olds. And they're going into these 5-year-olds and saying, do you like boys? Do you like girls? Do you feel like a boy? Do you feel like a girl? That is outrageous that any government agency would do that and talk about sex to minors as young as 5. And what's even more outrageous is they were creating a database on this. Now, I remember when I carried the SAFE Act a couple of years ago, one of our versions asks for anonymized data. In other words, strip out all the identifying factors. Just give us the statistics on how many kids you're putting on puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, surgeries, and everyone was crying foul. Gary Click wants the transgender database. That's going to be a clip somewhere, I'm sure. And now I found out that everything that they seem to accuse us of doing is exactly what they're doing. And they have this transgender database that they are also putting on that database. Are the parents affirming enough, or are they not? And you can read some of the comments there. By the way, you have access to the database. I put that in there. And so I put some of the cues in there. Let me just say this. It's neither a crime nor dangerous to raise your son as a boy, your daughter as a girl. They also use third-party coercive techniques. If you have a parent who maybe has a child that is confused about their gender and you tell them, Bobby, you're a boy, or Susie, no, you're a girl. They want to put you through re-education. They train all their staff to do this. They have videos out there that do this. And in those videos that they presented, they're basically criticizing parents and saying that you're harmful or you're dangerous for raising your son as a boy, your daughter as a girl. And by the way, if your religion gets involved in this, your religion is bad. You know, that's a violation of the First Amendment, because Congress shall make no laws respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof. They are violating that separation of church and state by criticizing the religious and ridiculing the religious beliefs of parents. And so we have some federal guidance that was issued. I have been in touch through third parties with the Department of Health and Human Services. They recently issued guidance. They are aware of my bill. It's been presented to them. They issued their own guidance that is very similar to my bill. Basically, it says that it is, if I can find the exact wording here, that it encourages states to adopt a definition of abuse and neglect that clearly defines what the term does and does not mean. For example, a state's definition should provide that treating a child in a manner consistent with his or her sex and refusing to condone sex-rejecting interventions does not constitute abuse. And my time has expired. I promised you to get it in 5 minutes, Chair, and I think I have done that. And I am so grateful to have the Honorable Josh Williams as my joint sponsor. Representative.
Chair Thomas, Vice Chair Swearingen, Ranking Member Sennenberg, and fellow members of the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 693 today. I also like to thank my joint sponsor, Representative Gary Click, for inviting me to be part of this common sense legislation and the tremendous hard work that he put in to helping draft this legislation with interested parties. However, we have since learned of troubling practices within certain child welfare agencies that go far beyond medical questions and instead target the constitutional rights of parents. Investigative reporting revealed that the Cuyahoga County Division of Children and Family Services implemented policies to proactively collect and track children's sexual orientation and gender identity data, in some cases involving very young children as young as 5. When a parent was reported to be allegedly non-affirming, the Division of Children would then use that as a sole basis to begin child welfare investigations, challenging a parent's fitness to raise their own children because they refuse to call a girl a boy and a boy a girl. In statute, that affirming a child's biological sex does not constitute abuse, neglect, or threat to the child's best interest. The state of Ohio should not label a parent abusive or neglectful simply because the parent affirms the child's biological sex. Parents should not have to abandon their sincerely held religious beliefs in order to retain custody of their children or to qualify as foster parents or adoptive parents in the state of Ohio. The United States Supreme Court has long recognized the right of a parent to direct the upbringing and education of their children. That principle does not disappear when a family has contact with the child welfare system, let alone when our child welfare system systematically seeks to take away these rights based on adherence to a transgender ideology. And that is exactly what Affirming Family First Act fundamentally seeks to rectify.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. Ranking Member Sonnenberg has a question.
Thank you, Chairman, through the chair to the representatives. Thank you both for being here today. Representative Click, your written testimony, the last paragraph states that we trust you will stand with us to protect the dignity of all families in the state of Ohio. So my thought is, what about the dignity and mental well-being of the children of Ohio? To that point, do you accept and acknowledge that transgender people do exist?
Thank you, colleague and friend, Representative Sonnenberg. We are protecting children are parts of families, and we protect all families. One of the things that's very important to recognize here is that even in the SAFE Act or this legislation, the SAFE Act banned the mutilation of children through hormones and through surgeries. It did not and still does not, and we are not proposing to tell families that they cannot socially affirm their children. Now, personally, I think that's a bad idea. Children need direction from their parents. But we have not said, if you want to treat Johnny as Susie or Susie as Johnny, we've not banned that. But they are trying to ban us from raising Johnny as Johnny and Susie as Susie. So we.
The specific question was, do you accept and acknowledge that transgender people, including children, do exist?
So that's kind of, through the chair to the representative, I think that's a trick question. I don't know that you meant it that way, but do I acknowledge that children have gender dysphoria? 100%. Do I acknowledge that children have gender identity disorder? That was what it was called previously. That's actually a better description of it. It was changed for political reasons. But do I think that a boy was born with a girl's brain or a girl was born with a boy's brain, and that you were born anybody could be born in the wrong body? I do not accept that as scientifically accurate. There's no science that validates that.
I guess psychological disorder for a person to believe that they are transgender.
Science teaches us that is a mental health issue. And through my prior research on the SAFE Act, all of these children have multiple comorbidities. Many of them are victims of abuse. And this trans identity is a means of escape. What we do know is that children who are left to their own without medical intervention, 98% of them will desist after puberty, and they will begin to re-identify with their natal sex. But we know that once you put those children on puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones, once you begin to validate that identity, that adds to the confusion. If a child has an eating disorder, if a skinny girl thinks she's fat, we don't help them by saying, yes, you are fat, let's get you liposuction. That doesn't work. And it's the same thing with children who are confused about their gender and their gender identity. And so the best help for them is to teach them the truth, help them to live authentically in the body that they were born with. Even the AMA is backing off of this, as are the American College of Plastic Surgeons. The WPATH files have revealed that WPATH is a fraudulent organization that knew that they were harming children. We can look at Jamie Reed, who is a lady that exposed this practice in Missouri. She is a lesbian who has worked in this field. She thought she was helping transgender children. She realized that she was harming them, and she's become an advocate across the nation, founded an organization called LGB Courage that stands for the truth and the biological science and reality that boys are boys and girls are girls.
I just want to make sure I'm on the record for what my personal opinion is. I do believe that individuals exist that believe they are the opposite sex. I believe those individuals exist. I think it's a false belief, and I think it's harmful for our society to affirm said false belief. And for time immemorial, that was considered a mental condition. And now we're in a position where members of our society, especially members of your caucus, decide that they want to affirm those beliefs in minor children as young as 5 years old. I reject that premise. I reject the ideology. And I believe that parents have a constitutional right to raise their children as they see fit, including affirming their biological sex. What we've So the idea that a government agency is able to coerce parents into calling their child by a different name or addressing them as a different gender is coercive in nature and unconstitutional violation of free speech. We're not picking sides saying whether or not a parent should affirm a child's gender or sexual orientation. We have not touched that in this bill. What this bill says is that if a parent refuses to accept that ideology and decides to raise their child in support and affirmation of their biological sex, it shall not be classified as abuse, neglect, dependency, or somehow against the best interest of the minor child. That's common sense, an 80-20 issue.
And if I could just clarify or amend my statement, I'm not ashamed to say what I believe and what I believe is scientific and accurate, medically accurate information. However, that is not what this bill is about. It's not about what I believe. It's about what a parent's rights are in raising their children. And that's was clarified by my honorable joint sponsor, who, by the way, is an attorney if you're keeping a bingo card going on. But that is the, maybe you can clarify, do you believe that the government should come in and tell parents how to raise their children?
So we're not here to debate the science behind it. We're simply saying that parents have a right to raise their children as they see fit. This is a constitutionally protected fundamental right that the U.S. Supreme Court has affirmed over and over and over again. If you want to stand on the position that not affirming a child's sexual orientation or gender as young as 5 years old is somehow making a parent unfit, that's something I would prefer you to go on the record for, not us. We're saying that parents have that right to make that decision. If you want to push that envelope and say that these parents are unfit, that's an 80-20 issue. Good luck.
Vice Chair Swearengin with a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for this bill. Grateful to co-sponsor it.
My investigative journalist, Megan Brock, and she called me because of the SAFE Act. She called me because she was doing some reporting on this, and she told me what was going on and asked me if I had a statement. And part of my statement was, I will not allow this to stand in Ohio.
They secretly did this database and survey without the knowledge of the parents or the legislators in the state of Ohio. They would do these screenings. They had scripts where they would walk in and introduce themselves according to their pronouns. Then ask the child, well, do you know what pronouns are? No, they were going to explain that your pronouns don't have to match your biological sex. Then they would explain what their sexual orientation is. Are they attracted to boys or girls? And we saw in the database a child as young as 5 years old listed as gay, and then the parents were listed as affirming. So that means they're not only tracking the sexual orientation of kids as young as 5 years old and their gender identity, but then they are tracking whether or not the parents are affirming or non-affirming. Became the poster child for the rest of the United States on what we should be doing, what I think is harmful to the child, and screening them for sexual orientation and gender identity.
UYS.
Have they reached out to you?
They have not reached out to me, but they have altered their website because fortunately I cached some of their websites and they've changed it since then. Some of the links are gone, not all of them. And I will say also that they have a category CAFF where there are that is designated in the database that you can read, and it talks about placing children with chosen affirming families rather than the families that do not affirm them.
One more follow-up. One question and then a comment. Do you expect them to come in for opposition testimony on this bill? And then I just have one final follow-up to that.
Through the chair, I hope they do.
Follow-up? Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do too. And I would urge this committee that if they don't, we should use our subpoena power to bring them in here and question them ourselves. So thank you for this bill. And that's my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Pickle-Antonio with a question.
Honestly, I find this repeated conversation exhausting when there are actual issues, including issues related to, I think you brought up child sexual abuse. There are real issues that exist that we're not talking about in the committee right now.
I'm just going to say it's very offensive to say this is not a real issue. You talk to Sage and her mother, ask her if it's a real issue. You talk to John Doe and his son out in Maryland, ask them if it's a real issue. You talk to parents who are being ridiculed for their religion by the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Youth Services. Ask them if this is a real issue. If you're being threatened to have your children removed from your home because you will not affirm them as something that they are not, that is a real issue. And that's why we are working on this for the families in the state of Ohio. And I'll let the Honorable Joshua Williams answer the rest of your question.
Through the chair to the member, I share my joint sponsor's outrage at your comments. For you to find it exhaustive for us to continue to deal with non-issues, as you said, and that there's real issues that exist. I think anytime the government threatens to take away your child, it's a real issue.
So one of the definitions that is included in this bill is a definition of something called parental alienation. It is a term that many notable legal authorities, including National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, American Prosecutors Research Institute, National District Attorneys Association, they have all dismissed the idea of parental alienation syndrome. So I wondered, I guess, why that term is part of this bill.
Whatever the basis is, it's a real issue because I've stood next to parents through custody disputes when they're fighting over whether or not a child gets to live with one parent again.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I've stood with parents during custody disputes. The origin of the term parental alienation is not the direction of this bill, but that is a real term that's used in family law. I don't know if you practice family law or not, but I do. And I've dealt with parental alienation before. And specifically, we're using the term here when we're talking about third-party groups that are putting pressure on the minor child to alienate from their parents. We're seeing that. We see it in California where they pass multiple pieces of legislation allowing children to run away from home and into the safety of NGOs, and they do not have to disclose that the child is with them. We've seen it in multiple states under Democrat control where you believe that third-party entities can go and solicit your child online, tell them they're transgender, give them resources, convince them to run away from home and into the arms of them, and then like Sage, they end up in the arms of human traffickers. So if you truly had an honest intent to talk about sexual abuse, you should be talking about Sage's case. That's an individual that was human trafficked because of the woke ideology that's being pushed by your caucus. And we're simply saying, look, we're not going to get in the middle of the ideology debate. But what we're going to say is that parents have the absolute right to raise their children because the court has said time and time again, they have a fundamental right, a fundamental constitutionally protected right as fit parents to decide what is in the best interest of their child. And we should not have an entity in this state that quietly and secretly can investigate you, label you, and work surreptitiously to remove your child simply because you don't buy in to the wokeness that's coming out of the Democrat Party. I absolutely believe that parents have a constitutional right to raise their children as they see fit. If you disagree with that premise, you disagree with the Supreme Court.
Follow up.
Thanks, Chair. There were a lot of words that were just said.
Through the chair to the representative, I'm going to say this in the most polite way as a lawyer to another lawyer. What I think you struggle with is the ability to read the statute. We're recognizing the actual parent's ability to raise their children. And we are saying that any outside entity, whether it's a parent that doesn't have guardianship or a third party that's putting pressure on the child to alienate from their parent, it's defined. That's what we said in the definition. So you conveniently left out the word both and left out subsection 2.
Through the chair to Representative Pico Antonio, I do believe you care about children just like we do. And we know these conversations can be heated in exchanges, and maybe I can get some clarification from you. When we're talking about Sage, who was taken from her parents tried to reach out to her, her parents tried to send her correspondence, her parents tried to see her, and the authorities told her that her parents didn't want her. Is that parental alienation? Would you consider that parental alienation?
Please respond, or please, if you wish to respond, you're welcome to respond. If you'd like to ask another question, you can ask another question.
Thank you, Chair. Just so I'm perfectly clear. how that plays out under this definition.
So I will allow the attorney to answer that question, but just for the record, you did not answer if that was parental alienation, what happened to Sage.
So I will be I don't know what the term means, parental alienation.
What we're saying is that by affirming your child's biological sex, it shall not be classified as abuse. I don't know if you're standing on the other side of that argument saying it should be classified as abuse because you haven't made that clear. But by the definition that we put, parental alienation is when a child rejects their actual guardian parent and seeks out a third party that is not the guardian, whether it's a parent that doesn't have guardianship, an organization, a group, or even a government entity that is encouraging them to move away from their parent. That's parental alienation. Parental alienation is used in family law terms as in one party pushes the child, coerces the child to alienate from the other party. We simply use the term in family law to say parental alienation. Typically, it is when one parent does it to the other. And I've experienced this through family law practice where one parent talks to the minor child about the dad and how bad of a guy he is and this and that. And the kid moves away from the dad and I don't want to see you anymore. And I've seen it where dad does it to mom and the kid moves away from mom. That term is used in family law. In this instance, we're talking about when third parties that are not the guardian pushes the child to remove themselves from the parent, like we saw in Sage's case. And in other cases where third parties are encouraging kids, because the parent is non-affirming of their sexual orientation or gender identity of the minor child, that these third parties are encouraging the kids to transition in secret. We saw that in the public schools. Transition in secret, given chest binders, which we saw in this case.
Yes.
We saw Cuyahoga County give a child a chest binder, even though the parent was not affirming. I mean, you're doing it without parental consent. Those third parties are pushing the child more and more away from the parent and into their sphere of influence. And we're saying that that's parental alienation, and it should be.
Follow.
Thanks, Chair. Representative Williams, I think you brought up a question that I have maybe for both of you, which is, what is your perspective about parents who affirm their children? Are they abusing their children? Should they lose custody of their children?
Through the chair, that is not a part of this legislation, and no, we are not suggesting that they should lose their custody of their children.
I'm just trying to figure out what's actually happened here in Ohio.
I've just heard of the case in Ohio. Can you give me in the committee an overview of what's actually happened on the ground?
In the state of Ohio and in other states where we had gay couples suing for the right to become foster parents, the right to become adoptive parents, saying that our sexual orientation shouldn't be a factor in whether or not we're fit parents. Now we're seeing the opposite, where couples that are not willing, or adoptive parents, prospective foster parents who are not willing to affirm the child's gender identity or sexual orientation are essentially being barred from placement of that child. Of the federal mandate that came down from the Biden administration, the idea was that you screen these kids when they come in contact with the Child Protective Services, you categorize them, classify them, and if there are placement opportunities, you only do it with affirming individuals. The second phase was then you could use that as a basis of abuse or neglect, and that's where you're starting to see these things pop out of essentially Democrat-controlled states, where they push legislation saying that it is abuse, that your child can be removed from you based on the fact that you're not affirming.
So, and again, if you'll take a look at the database, you'll see columns X and Y are blacked out. All they do is black it out, but they didn't properly redact it. So you can look up in the header and see what it actually says. And that's where you see a 5-year-old, that's where you see a 9-year-old, that's where you see CAFF, which means that they're placing that child with a chosen affirming family. We have a case in there where it says mother needs help. There was one mother that was afraid to let her son go off into be hospitalized because she's afraid she's going to lose the child and so forth. And what we also see here, which we've not addressed yet, I'm surprised that our colleagues on the other side haven't brought it up yet, but there are families who have been denied the ability in certain parts of our state to seek counseling to help their child the counseling that they want. They totally corrupt the meaning of conversion therapy, and conversion therapy requires force, it requires pain, electroshock therapy, ice baths, and things like that. And they want to describe it as if you tell a boy he's a boy, that's conversion therapy. I think conversion therapy is when you tell a boy he's a girl, that's conversion therapy. And in fact, many of the people in the LGBT community have said that's conversion therapy, because you're taking children that are normally gay, bi, or lesbian, and you're telling them that they have to change sex to be legitimate. And many people in that community are outraged by this type of a policy and a process. And there was a lady in Cincinnati who I spoke with whose child was going through these gender struggles. And she, rather than take her to someone to deal with the gender affirming care, she took her child to someone who really wasn't even familiar with that theory and just dealt with eating disorders, and used the same cognitive behavioral therapy that you would use with a child with eating disorders. And that child naturally developed out of it. There was no coercion, there was no force, but our colleagues want to trap children into that misnomer that they are born in the wrong body. And that's a part of what this is happening in Cincinnati. Cuyahoga County is proud. They're the first ones to ban that. They say boldly, yeah, we're glad we did it. But parents want the choice to be able to take their child to someone who can help them understand how they are made perfectly and genuinely and authentically.
Just really quickly, through the chair, so that remember, there are other instances that we know what happened in Ohio. One, they came up with parental education classes, where if you are a non-affirming parent, you would have to take these classes to teach you that you should be affirming. So essentially indoctrinating the parent into the woke ideology, where that threatens the fact that what happens if you don't want to take the class? What if you're not affirming? There's no records because juvenile cases are sealed. What we also know happened in the state of Ohio is there was third-party entities that were contracted through Cuyahoga County that would train their staff member on non-affirming being abuse and neglect, and for you to start looking for it in your cases. So that's now shifting the mindset of employees to treat non-affirming parents as though they are inherently abusive to their children. And this bill addresses that as well. We're saying that you shall not contract with contractors that provide that type of training to employees in the state of Ohio that indicate that non-affirming of your child's sexual orientation or gender identity is somehow inherently abusive. Instead, we flip it on its head and say affirming a child's biological sex shall not be considered abuse, neglect, or against contrary to the child's best interest.
All you need to do to open up an investigation is someone can report anonymously. I could report you and say, hey, I think he's abusing his child, or I don't think his child's eating enough, or whatever it is. As soon as you do that, it's anonymous, number one. And then number two, they are required to open up an investigation. And if you read the documentation that's in there, they say, ask every child this. So you don't just go look and say, that kid looks like they might be trans or they might be gay or something. And then you ask, no, every child is supposed to be asked these questions, every single child. So somebody could just make a false allegation against you. CPS shows up and they start asking your child all of these invasive questions. If that's all it was, it's enough. I don't want some adult, some stranger coming in and asking thank God all my children are grown right now, but I wouldn't want some stranger coming in and asking my children if they like boys or girls when they're in kindergarten. It's ludicrous. It's crazy.
I'm recognizing Representative Mohammed for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I wanted to just briefly ask about what impact this bill will have on courts. So generally in Ohio, courts consider what they call the best interest of the child. They're not considering the political ideology of the parent or their preference. It's almost always on the best interest of the child. And judges typically have a lot of latitude. They consider all factors, and this is an issue that obviously a lot of us disagree on. It's understandable, but I think Rep. Williams mentioned how we don't want to politicize this issue. And one of the things that we're concerned about is you're creating a carve out. You're saying judges can't consider all relevant factors. Why create this exception?
Well, through the chair, Representative Mohammed, that's a very thoughtful question. I thank you for it. And that is because there are some judges who are injecting and they are receiving, guardian ad litem testimonies or from CPS who would say this is harmful, and they would receive that information and consider this factor. We are simply saying this is one factor that you cannot consider, because saying that a judge cannot say, well, I think he is trans, so now you have to treat him that way or else. That's not up for the state of Ohio to decide in any courtroom or any department. That's something for the parents to decide, and we are making sure that we are protecting parental rights.
Senator Mohammed with the
Follow
follow-up.
up. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So in response to that, again, let me give you a specific scenario. Let's say you have a situation where a parent is clearly rejecting a child's identity. You have a clear situation where there's clear evidence that that child's being harmed physically, social, mentally, emotionally, not necessarily physically, because that's physical abuse, but emotionally, there's clear evidence to that regard. Would that not directly, you're essentially preventing courts from considering that as a factor. That's what I'm going for. It's a specific situation why judges would not consider that as a possibility.
Through the chair as a representative, because the parent is exercising a constitutionally protected right. But are we going to get in a position of the government's going to be able to step in at every parental decision that's made by fit parents? The Supreme Court clearly said that we can't. So all we're doing is clarifying by statute that the court cannot use the best interest of the child standard to offset the decision of fit parents when it comes to gender identity and sexual orientation of a minor child. That's all this does.
Through the chair, Representative Mohammed, my view is that we ought to love our children no matter what they go through, whether we agree with it or whether we disagree with it. But we do know that sometimes that disagreement could lead to other actions that might not be illegal, such as physical abuse, as you mentioned. That's still illegal. This is not an excuse to physically abuse your child. But we are just simply saying the basic premise that you affirm your son as a boy or your daughter as a girl is not abuse. Anything outside of that that is normally abuse does not change.
Representative Click and Representative Williams, my understanding is you guys have sponsored testimony in other committees?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so I realize you may have additional questions, but if we have more hearings, we'll have hopefully plenty of time to ask those questions.
Thank
So
you, sir.
gentlemen, thank you for your testimony.
All right. Well, Representative, it was so good to hear and see what you do throughout the day. Any closing thoughts
Well,
on?
you see it every day.
That is
but-
true. That is true. I'm
But,
glad the listeners get to see it and hear about it.
it's interesting to compact it into a shorter amount of time, and we do want people to see what we do because listen, we're accountable to the people,
Mhm.
and I work for the people, and the people deserve to know what we're fighting for. They deserve to know that we are fighting for them, and not just to hear me tell it, but have them see it and hear it for themselves. And so that's what this episode is all about. Just saying, hey, this is what my week was like working for the people in Sandusky and Seneca counties, and really for all of Ohio.
Absolutely. It was so good to just hear about all the policy, hear the testimony. Any closing thoughts before we let the listeners?
Yeah, well, so we got more coming up. Next week we're going to be hearing House Bill 420, which is to eliminate the continuous levies. And, it's continuous levies, one that just goes on and on and on and on, no end date to it. And say, okay, every levy ought to have a sunset. You ought to have to re-up it once in a while. Let taxpayers know why they're paying this tax and give them a chance to say, yeah, that's a tax I support, or no, that's a tax I don't support. And so we want to add that to the list of the $3 billion worth of tax relief that we've already put out there. And we want to add this to the list for accountability purposes. And then, coming soon, we've got House Bill 646, which is the Data Center Study Commission. And that is a response to our constituents here in Ohio. We had a meeting about that recently with just some stakeholders here in the district, and we're going to be looking at what's going to happen with that. The speaker has said publicly that he anticipates that coming off the House floor sometime before the end of March, and we're starting to run out of March, so who knows when that'll be. But I look forward to getting that over to the Senate, already having some conversations with some senators on that, because we want to make sure the voice of the people is heard and that we have reasonable, responsible, educated opinions, not just opinions, but facts on the table when we talk about the data centers and what are the best practices. Should they be banned? Should they not be banned? Should they be regulated? Should they be taxed? What should all of that look like? And we are going to dive into that with our Data Center Study Commission. So that should be on the floor soon. Don't know when, but soon.
All right. Well, I look forward to it. Listeners, we hope you have a great week and you join us next week for What's Clickin' with State Representative Gary Click.
Boom.
All done.
Great.
You've been listening to What's Clickin', the official podcast of State Representative Gary Click, covering Ohio's 88th House District. That includes Seneca and Sandusky counties in Northwest Ohio. I'm Janae Myers, his legislative aide. If you would like to reach out to us, you can send us an email at rep88, that's REP88, at ohiohouse.gov, or you can give us a call at 614-466-1374. Thanks again for joining us for What's Clickin' with State Representative Gary Click. We'll be back again soon to let you know what's clickin' in Ohio.